Hello, today is October 26th, and we are reading our psalm for this week. This week we are celebrating Reformation Sunday, and so our psalm is Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be moved, and though the mountains shake in the depths of the sea, though its waters rage and foam, and though the mountains tremble with its tumult. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of the city. It shall not be shaken. God shall help it at the break of day. The nations rage and the kingdoms shake. God speaks and the earth melts away. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. Come now, regard the works of the Lord, what desolations God has brought upon the earth. Behold the one who makes war to cease in all the world, who breaks the bow and shatters the spear and burns the shields with fire. Be still then, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. Psalm 46, if you are unaware, is the inspiration for the classic Reformation hymn, A Mighty Fortress is Our God, that was written by Martin Luther. And so on Reformation Sunday, in celebration of what the Reformers stood for, what the Reformers found their faith in, we both sing Martin Luther's song, A Mighty Fortress, and we read the inspiration for the song. That is Psalm 46. So what is this psalm telling us? What do we get from this psalm? It is a psalm about the city of God, fundamentally about God's faithfulness and God's power to bring peace and security to God's people. When it talks about in this passage, when it talks about a river whose streams make glad the city of God, and when it talks about God being in the midst of the city, don't make the mistake. This is about Jerusalem. This is a song that was likely written before the exile. This is sometimes considered one of the royal psalms, even though it doesn't mention any kind of king. In the same way that some of the other psalms make explicit mention of the king or prayers that God blesses the king seated in Jerusalem. Instead, this psalm simply, there is no human king, there is no human warrior whose ability to make war is being prayed for in Psalm 46. Instead, Psalm 46 puts a different king at the center. It puts God in the midst of the city as the true ruler of God's people. This is a crucial theological move in the Hebrew Scriptures. The king is an important figure, to be sure, but the king is not Pharaoh. If you recall, the Pharaoh in Exodus, the enemy of Moses, the enslaver of the people of Israel, is set up as God's rival, if you can imagine that. The Pharaoh of Egypt was considered a divine being, a person whose very role meant that they were somehow divine in their very nature as king. They were a god king. And for God to act against Pharaoh meant for God to test himself against another god. Now, we know the ending of that Pharaoh, of course, couldn't stand against the creator of the universe. But here in Psalm 46, we go beyond God testing himself against some human king who pretends that he's divine. Instead, this gets into what it means for God to be our king, what it means for God to be at the center of life rather than some other authority. And it means finding safety and refuge. We will not fear though the earth be moved, though the mountains shake in the depths of the sea, its waters rage and foam. there is a lot of chaos happening in this psalm, a lot of destruction and things that would probably frighten me if I were around them, earthquakes and tsunamis. But God is our refuge and our strength in the midst of the natural disaster. God causes the earth to stand still. God is in the midst of the city, and then it goes from natural disaster to human disaster. The nations rage and the kingdoms shake. God speaks, and the earth melts away. All of the saber rattling and motions toward war, God can stop with a word. When God is with us, who can stand against us? Is what this psalm is saying again and again. Behold, and finally God brings the chaos of war, of conflict, this intra-human conflict, who makes war to cease in all the world. God as king is not a king who destroys or uses his power in a destructive manner at a whim. Instead, the destruction of God is the destruction of war itself. That God's power is used exclusively for the peace and security of God's people. This is the promise of Psalm 46. This is the source of our faith, the ground of our hope, and that's why Martin Luther wrote A Mighty Fortress. Faced with fear of excommunication, faced with fear of attack, faced with the fear of death, Martin Luther and his reforming friends, those who stood for what they believed in despite the extreme political danger they were putting themselves in, stood firm in this psalm, stood firm in their identity as Christians above all else, even if they had to criticize the religious authorities as they were at that time. What is so great about this primary hymn, A Mighty Fortress is Our God, and what's great about Psalm 46 is that it's not a psalm about vanquishing our enemies or condemning them to some sort of eternal hell. It is a song about our security in a God who protects us and our faith that this conflict will come to an end by the grace and power of God. Thanks be to God for that. Thanks be to God that God is faithful. That God does keep his people in his care throughout natural disaster, throughout war, throughout conflict of all kinds. That's a source of hope. I hope you are having a good week. See you later. Bye-bye.